welcome back to my channel. I'm super excited to get into today's topic. Whether you like football or not, we all know the Super Bowl is one of the most viewed events ever, and I never really see people talking too much about what it's like actually attending it. I had the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to attend the Super Bowl a couple years ago, and I never really told the story of what it was like. The reason I got to go is a pretty unique one, but before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit more of the backstory of what led me attending the Super Bowl in 2021, which, if you do the math, the 2021 Super Bowl was the only, and hopefully only one ever, to take place during a pandemic. So there was a lot of interesting factors going on, and I'm excited to tell you about it because I really realized I've never done that before. Here is my Super Bowl ticket. Of course, I kept it for keepsake. So I'll be honest, I'm not like a die-hard NFL football fan, but I do enjoy game days, I enjoy going to the games, and growing up, my dad was a huge football fan, still is, of the Dolphins and the Vikings. I grew up in South Florida, so I'm a Dolphins fan. And then, you know, when I was in college, just like getting together with all my friends at sports bars and watching the games and stuff like that, it's just a fun thing that I enjoy to do. That said, I had never been to an NFL game ever in person until the Super Bowl. So my first ever NFL game was the Super Bowl, which I like to share as my fun fact because who gets to say that? Like, I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity. As a refresher, the 2021 NFL season was probably the most interesting one because they were dealing with the pandemic, and with that was dealing with people testing positive for COVID, what to do if a player on the team tested positive, would they still do a game, would they not do a game, actually hosting people at the games, at the stadiums with social distancing, and everything in between, which I probably wouldn't have paid too much attention to if my sister didn't become an NFL cheerleader during that season for the first time ever. So it was her rookie season. She tried out to be a Buccaneers cheerleader, and at the time it was during lockdown, so all of the tryouts were essentially virtual. She'd have to like take videos of herself doing different choreography, send it in, do interviews virtually. I think there was some in-person components from what I remember, but it was very much so they needed to be social distancing. But when she actually got onto the team, the next challenge was for them to figure out how can cheerleaders perform and cheer on the Buccaneers while safely social distancing so they're not getting sick themselves, and then of course not getting any of the players sick and, you know, the people that work at the stadium and stuff like that. So uniquely enough, her first season of being an NFL cheerleader, they did not cheer on the actual field, which if you've ever been to a game before, the cheerleaders normally are performing kind of like in the corners around the field, so the players can see them and so can everyone in the audience in the stands. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers play at Raymond James Stadium, which is located in Tampa Bay, and the Buccaneers, their mascot is a pirate. And at the stadium, they actually have a large pirate ship, which is really cool. It's a really fun, immersive stadium with a lot of pride and a lot of pirates, honestly, just running around the whole time. But during the pandemic, they actually created kind of a platform in the stands for the cheerleaders to perform their dances, so that way they weren't on the field, but they were still social distancing and away from the players. But they also had to wear masks, and we're in Florida, so it would be like 1 p.m. game days, 90-something degrees, just like super hot and humid. They all got through it and obviously ended up resulting in the opportunity of a lifetime, because for the Super Bowl that year, it was the first year Tom Brady went to Tampa Bay, you know, turned that team around and just ended up bringing them to the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. At the time, I personally was living in downtown Fort Lauderdale, and my sister's first entire season of being an NFL cheerleader, I never made it to any of the games. And that's because, you know, COVID, wanting to make sure I'm safe, also didn't live here and was not sure if I wanted to drive 4 hours to be in a stadium of people to potentially bring home a sickness. And just like a lot of factors went into me not attending any of the games to cheer her on. So that's kind of the backstory of what was going on in the NFL and in the world, and then in my personal life that led me to never attending any of the games to support her. So when the Super Bowl is taking place at a stadium, it's more of the NFL that's calling the shots than the local stadium and the people that work at that specific team. You know, I think when I went to the Super Bowl, it was pretty unique because Tampa Bay was playing in it and it was taking place at Tampa Bay, but normally it's not like that. You know, normally the stadium that the Super Bowl is going to be at is determined years in advance, where obviously no one can predict who the actual teams are going going to be playing in it. So while of course the local team and stadium is part of the planning process and making sure everything goes smoothly, it's the NFL that is calling those larger shots because, you know, all of the NFL is going to be here for that game, as well as, you know, media, and it's just a much larger event than a regular season game. So that said, when it came to the cheerleaders for the Chiefs and the Buccaneers, there was a lot of discussion, you know, in general, talking about how do we approach the Super Bowl, which is an event that brings in thousands of people into one place during the pandemic. So it really wasn't decided until almost just very, very last minute that the cheerleaders would be very limited in who can perform at the Super Bowl, which of course is a huge honor and a privilege. And these cheerleaders on both teams cheered alongside the teams the entire season, and it's the Super Bowl, so who wouldn't want to be part of that? Because of the pandemic, it was unfortunately decided that only a handful of people on each team could actually perform at the Super Bowl in order to limit the amount of people like on the field, in the stands, and stuff like that. And essentially what happened was the people who didn't get chosen to cheer at the actual Super Bowl, and in my sister's case it was her rookie year, so it kind of went to people who had more experience on the team and more veterans. They had the opportunity to go to the Super Bowl as an attendee and bring one person. So very last minute, I'm very grateful my sister chose me, and we got to attend the Super Bowl as attendees. She, of course, you know, still was representing the Buccaneers, and like I said, I wasn't even living in Tampa at the time. I had visited Tampa a bunch, and we got to go. So to talk about the actual Super Bowl, there was one kind of small setback that I had to deal with personally. I didn't buy the tickets myself. I was just kind of like allowed to go very last minute. I didn't really have a say. You know, no one really had a say in the tickets, where I wasn't given accessible seats. You know, which I've done plenty of times before, where I kind of just leave my scooter off to the side and then walk up or down the steps to get to my seats. But it was a little challenging for me because the railings at most stadiums, they kind of have gaps in them. So there will be a railing and then a couple steps without a railing, and then a railing and a couple steps without a railing. So for me, as someone who heavily relies on the railing, it was a little challenging for me. I of course had my sister there to help me, but every time I had to go to the bathroom or something like that, it just was a pain. But that said, I was just so excited to be there that I didn't care, and I was happy to do it. And you know, I think something else that was really unique to that specific Super Bowl is that they really did limit the amount of people that were in attendance. So me and my sister, she of course got 2 tickets, so her and I sat next to each other, and then I think the next like 4 or 5 seats next to us were just cardboard cutouts of people to make it look like the front for the people watching at home. It made it look like the stadium was full of people, but in reality it was maybe a third of the people in the actual seats that were real. So that was really, really kind of eerie, but it was also cool, and it actually came with a lot of benefits because when you think of the Super Bowl, it's normally a super packed stadium, so the lines for the bathroom, concessions, and stuff like that are usually super long, and you also don't really want to be missing anything going on in the Super Bowl. So with it being such a limited capacity, it was really easy for me to go to the bathroom or grab a snack or a drink without having to wait in a super long line. So I like to say we were a little spoiled in that sense. And it was also really unique because locally in Tampa, they awarded a lot of Super Bowl tickets to healthcare workers to help, you know, to thank them for everything they've been doing throughout the pandemic. So while we weren't directly sitting next to people, we could still talk to a lot of those healthcare workers that were around us, kind of in between the cardboard cutouts, and just hear kind of their experiences of what they've been going through. And then they of course got to attend this game just as we did. Where traditionally, you know, someone like me or these healthcare workers, like, we don't have $10,000 to spend on a ticket like this. So the way it all just happened, I'm very grateful for, and to kind of experience that with other people that were making such an impact during the time was really, really unique, and just a nice way to kind of celebrate collectively what was going on in the world with an experience that could have gone super, super differently if we weren't going through a pandemic. Since attending the Super Bowl, I have attended regular games with the Buccaneers, and being at the Super Bowl, it is a much, much bigger production. Outside of the stadium, they have helmets for every team, so I got to find one with the Dolphins and took a picture for my dad. You know, they have little NFL fan zone activations, tons and tons of photo opportunities. So much media is at this event. I think traditionally there probably would have been a lot more celebrities in attendance, which I didn't get to really see, but I think because it was the pandemic, not as many were here for it. But I think you can definitely just feel the difference of the Super Bowl versus a regular season game. So I thought that was interesting to kind of compare the two after the fact, since it was my first NFL game ever. I also want to talk about the halftime show because I love watching the halftime shows during the Super Bowl, but I've never experienced one in person before. So I think the artists, I have a lot of respect for them because they obviously have to keep in mind what does the performance look like for people at home, because that's the majority of the people that are actually watching the Super Bowl. But they also want to make it a full stadium experience where everyone in the stands can really enjoy it too. So the year I went, The Weeknd was the halftime performer, and I'm actually a huge fan of The Weeknd. I started listening to him when I was in high school. I've seen him in concert before, like myself, and I just really love his music and love him as a performer. So I was really, really excited to be there in person to watch his Super Bowl performance. He ended up getting a lot of negative backlash about his performance because a lot of the critiques were saying he didn't bring anyone else out, like any other performers, and that, just a lot of people were talking down on what he did. But I do feel that he was put in some kind of interesting situations because of the pandemic. It was harder for him to bring other artists out. I don't even know if it was allowed technically. And he did the most with what he could while also making sure the performers with him were socially distancing. I will say, I don't know if you guys remember, but the first half of his performance, or the intro, he is kind of like going through different mirrors and singing at the camera, and I remember being in person for that, not knowing what was going on because it was kind of in an area that wasn't on the field. So for the beginning of the performance, I didn't feel as connected to it. I think watching it back after the fact, I'm like, wow, this looks really cool to people at home. But being at the actual stadium, it looked a little off. But then once he actually got onto the field, it was incredible. We all had wristbands that lit up at different parts of the stadium during different parts of his songs, so it was a really immersive experience. And then he had, probably a couple hundred guys out there on the field with him, dressed up like him, doing choreographed dances while being socially distant. So it was really visually really cool to see in person, and watching it back on TV after the fact, I think it looked really cool on TV as well. But again, I think the first part was a little challenging for being there in person, but once he did get on the field and do the rest of the performance, I was blown away. Like it was so incredible to see, and I personally think he did like such an amazing job. So that was just such a unique way to experience the halftime show, obviously being there in person, because I never would have thought about, the aspect of they have to think about the people in the stadium and then the people at home viewing it as well. So to kind of finish off the experience at the Super Bowl, as a reminder, it was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Kansas City Chiefs, who are going to the Super Bowl again this year. We did beat them, so the Bucs actually ended up winning in Tampa Bay, which was such a surreal feeling. And I think, especially as someone who didn't live there yet, I didn't even know at the time that I was going to be moving, but you just felt how prideful every single person was in that stadium. There were fireworks, everyone is just crying, tears of joy, watching Tom Brady win the Super Bowl and how he turned the whole team around. It was really incredible to be there in the flesh. And then I remember leaving the Super Bowl, just what the city was like, having your team win while you're hosting. It was just incredible. Like, I remember driving home to my sister's apartment and people were just pulled over on the side of the road, at the side of the highway, just dancing, like in the street, blasting music, celebrating, and it was just the whole mood, like everyone was just so happy. So it was just really, really cool to experience, and I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of insight what it was like going to the Super Bowl, especially with the Super Bowl being next weekend. That's kind of a little recap of what my experience was like. The only other thing I forgot to mention, I feel like going into it, security was way, way more strict than a regular season game. You know, I think security regardless is always pretty strict now. You have to go through metal detectors and get your bag searched, but there was a couple different levels of security to get into the actual Super Bowl, which I just wanted to mention as one of the other differences. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little recap of me sharing what it was like going to the Super Bowl. I personally, you know, on every other year of my life when I haven't attended one in person, I like to usually just get together with some friends. I like to make some kind of like game day snacks, like jalapeno poppers or some kind of dip or something. I like to watch the Puppy Bowl. If you're not familiar with the Puppy Bowl, definitely check it out. It's really just a bunch of puppies like playing with football toys and stuff, and it's really cute. And I love the commercials. I have a background in public relations, and I've just always really enjoyed marketing and ad campaigns, so I love to watch the commercials at the Super Bowl. So that was one thing being in person I kind of missed out on, but you know, happy to make the sacrifice. But yeah, let me know in the comments, what do you like to do for Super Bowl Sunday? And I'm also curious, who do you think is going to win? Is it going to be the Kansas City Chiefs or the 49ers? I'm interested. I'm kind of rooting for the 49ers just to give someone else some love since the Chiefs won last year. But let me know what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment. The Buccaneers actually invited me to a game this season, and they got me a personalized jersey, so I wanted to thank them because this is just so cool to have. Can't wait to wear it next season.